Good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock on a Sunday, and I'm here. I slept in way too late. I woke up originally at about 6-ish and rolled back over. And next thing you know, I'm waking up and it's 9:30, and I have a stream at 10. So, good morning. If you're a father, happy Father's Day. If you're filling that role in any way, shape, or form, happy Father's Day. Uh, how's it going? Hey, Sean, welcome. Mage's Musings is here. This is the first coffee of the morning, and as you can tell, I am still not awake yet. Um, but I'm going to make a go of it. Um, yeah, I'm still all stuffed up and fun stuff like that. So I hope everybody's doing okay. Hope it's been a good week. I know I've had an okay week. Um, it's been interesting. It's we yeah. Let's see what's been going on since last time I talked to you. God, time has no meaning anymore. Uh, did a cool thing for my brother's birthday. I think last Sunday. Yeah, last Sunday, which is why, or maybe the Sunday before. I can't remember. Again, time has no meaning. That was cool, gaming wise. Got together with a bunch of my brother's friends and we played board games, and that was really neat. It's a great group of guys. I don't get to hang out with them nearly not as much as I'd like to, just because of scheduling. Um, but it's always awesome because whenever I do, it's you know it's never weird. It's always really cool. So that was fun. Um, let's see, didn't have game that week because of the thing, and then so the following Monday is not a game Monday, and then this last weekend would have been Cody's game, but that's still on hold. And then I was not feeling great Monday. I actually got out and did some yard work and forgot that I was a mere mortal and was just not. I was hurt, so I was not in any position to try and run a game, especially in a live streamed game. Um, you know, if it was a table game or something between friends, just online, I could probably fumble through it. But there's always that slight performative edge, even in my low production standards for a streamed game. Uh, Dirty History Hobbies, we have one who will bug us, and he sleeps until we move. So as long as we are still in bed, he is cool. It's I'm not as wrecked as a lot of people my age. Um, I was talking to my kid the other day about this, um, and I feel like you go one of two ways when you're growing up and you have to do a lot of hard work. You either decide it's for you and you become okay with hard work, like physical work, and you continue to do it. And the other way is you learn to despise it and find ways not to do it, or you know. And for me, I went the other way. I'm not a very you know. We laugh in my household because if something needs building, my wife is the one to do it. I never learned those skills, um, despite having worked in fields before that early in my life. It just didn't take. Growing up on a farm and being the oldest by 6 years, I had to do a lot, and it was just for me. It was like I don't have to do this. I'm not going to. I mean, I loved growing up on a farm. I wish I could have done that for my kids. But at the same time, I never got that. Oh, let's go big, do some backbreaking work. Problem is that it needs to be done sometimes, and because I have not done a lot of it, my body is not used to that, and so when I go out and I'm having a good time, like my wife laughs and she's like, "Well, I know if a hole needs digging, you're the one to do it because give me a shovel and I'll dig forever." But I don't respect my body in that regard and like end up hurting. Anyways, long story short, I was messed up, and yeah, but so yeah, I haven't done a lot in the way of gaming the last couple of weeks, and that's sad because I like the gaming. But I'm always working on game stuff. I've been doing some writing for adventures. And of course, I keep plugged into the gaming universe, um, paying attention to what's coming out game wise. And so, I mean, for the most part, I was one of the comments I've made to lately is gaming is cool. Role playing games are really neat in that they are a hobby that you can engage in almost constantly. Because if you're not playing them, then you can be planning them, or and it's also one of those rare hobbies where just thinking about them is an effective engagement with that hobby. You know, if you're into fishing, yes, you can think and plan and strategize for fishing, but at the end of the day, you're not you're not really accomplishing much for fishing, at least in my perspective. Um, Whereas for gaming, like role playing games, at least, even the act of sitting there and thinking about your world, your game, your adventures is actively improving and adding to the time when you get to physically play it, because it is so much of a mental exercise. Even if we're at a table physically rolling dice and playing out our characters, it's still a mental engagement, and as such, just thinking and planning about it um, is you know it it will help your game. Um, Thank you, James. Brian, I always want to call you by your last name. Just gonna go full on like, "Hey James, how's it going?" But yeah, it's funny. I try to keep them when I'm digging. What we've been doing is planting shrubs and trees on our property, um, and you know it's been about measuring how much room do they need, and then making sure that it's deep enough and that it's relatively cylindrical. So when it goes in, and I'm just digging with a hand shovel, so like nothing overly technical, but it's been a fun one. Um, Been figuring out my interim grill. See, when I lived back in Washington, we lived in that house for like 12 years, even though it was a rental, and got progressively and successively better at grilling, and kind of had refined my grill station when I was there. Now, we didn't have room for that when I moved. So uh, when we moved here, I didn't have a grill, and my wife had picked me up one just so I could get out and grill, because she knows I like to grill, and so she picked me up just one of those little, like almost like tailgating little kettle grills, and it's been really hard to figure out how to get that one dialed in, because I'm used to like a big 5 foot wide you know charcoal grill with multiple zones and smoker box and built-in temperature gauge, everything short of like precision gas control. And so, I had an adjustable coal, adjustable charcoal bed, that could go up and down. And this one is like so little space and such a little. I finally have done, I think dialed it in after about 3 or 4 uses, which is cool. But yeah, so I'll probably be doing some more of that. Maybe tonight. I don't know. Man, my dream is actually a brick grill station with a smoker box built in, but also connected to the natural gas that's for the house. So it can have a gas grill, have a gas burner, and have electricity to it. So it's got like a mini fridge and stuff in it. And who knows, now that I own a house, maybe I'll get a chance to actually build that. We'll see. That is not gaming worthy, but someday. Let's see. This is going to be a rambly story time kind of a stream, because I don't have any games to talk about that I've been playing. And gaming wise, it's the usual stuff. I had planned on talking about the topic of running sort of an open table horror RPG, based on some thoughts I posted in previous days on the Discord. Exactly, rambly ambly storytimely. I like that. I want it on a shirt. I've been in a horror mood lately. Been revisiting the creepypasta rage that I missed. That was my kids' thing. And so, sorry if you see me bad at the air. One of the problems with having a basement is sometimes you get drain flies, because there's a sump down here, and I have them, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to treat my sump. But in the meantime, I have them in the air. And they like my coffee. Anybody who knows me will know that I am definitely at least the storytimely and very much the rambly ambly. So I may just get that tattooed on me. No, but the creepypasta thing. So when if you're older like me, the creepypasta thing, and I discovered that not everybody knows about it, even people who are younger than me. But it was an early 2000s internet rage, for those who may not know what it is, where there were many forums like the No Sleep and stuff like that, where forums on Reddit and all that, where people would post horror stories. And they often had rules, like you had to post them as if they really did happen, and the story had to include some mechanism by which it made it to the internet. The idea was to make them feel as real as possible. And so, anyways, my kids were really into it, and I was tangentially aware, but not super into it. And like a lot of things as adults, when our kids get into them, we kind of sort of have a tendency to poo-poo them, and like also fall into those weird generational things like, oh, horror. When I was a kid, we had Puppet Master and Subspecies and Nightbreed and Hellraiser and all that stuff. And so I was aware of it, and but I found recently I found a podcast called the Creepcast, which is hosted by 2 other horror podcasters / YouTubers. And they have been revisiting the creepypastas. And what's neat is they'll read them, and then I'll also do commentary on them. And some of these are downright just really well written, but they are absolutely gut-punchingly brutal in their punchlines. And it's no wonder that some of the people who engaged in this early 2000s creepypasta thing have gone on to other things. one of the authors of one of the more famous creepypastas. Hey, morning squirrel, morning John. Um, had She went on to write the Hill House TV series that was on recently. That was really good. Um, that. So these people have gone from writing obscure internet horror into doing great things, um, which is really cool. Anyways, so the neat thing about this is it's got me back in a horror mood. But the byproduct of this is that I reached out to my youngest, who was really into this. They kind of bounced off my oldest. He doesn't like horror, um, uh, but my youngest is very much my mini me, and this only proves more of it. So what is really cool is by revisiting these old stories that I knew my kid was into. Not only have I been talking to them about, you know, what do you think of the story and all of that, I've been learning things about my kid that I missed back then. I didn't engage in the creepypasta thing, not just out of a generational kind of haha whatever you kids in your horror. I also wanted to give I liked to give my kids space to have their own thing, and so um, because it's too easy to crush your kids' interests in things by doing one of two things: either showing too much interest or just becoming too vested in comparing and contrasting their stuff to what you do and what you did. You can really just take the wind out of their sails that way. And so I had made that mistake with my oldest in a couple of ways. And so by the time my youngest came around, I had learned a few lessons. You know, always the benefit of the later child, for better or for worse, actually, I guess. But anyways, so it's been kind of interesting. It's been kind of cool. I didn't talk to my kid, learning, and I didn't realize that these stories, terrifying as they are to an adult reading them, and as creepy as they are, really had my child like terrified. Um, that and had some sort of shitlord friend in their family in their friends group who was very much dead set on convincing the kids at the time this was real, which in those early internet days, a little easier to do. We're talking about the earlier internets where we couldn't just Google it. Well, you could Google it. As the internet has progressed, it's been harder and harder to pull off scams. Think about like the Blair Witch, right? And how much that hit people and how well orchestrated that was. Anyways, all of this has got me thinking about horror again, and not just Call of Cthulhu, which is the easy one for me, but just general horror stories. Um, I'm writing again, which is cool. I have to track down where I put all my old stories, my short stories that I've written. They're on a drive somewhere. I have this horrible habit of writing stories on the computer I'm on and saving them there rather than saving them to transferable media, like an external drive or anything like that. Um, Disagree, mages. I disagree. I really actually dug the movie. Um, for It absolutely achieved what it was meant to do, and um, it was unnerving for me. Uh, I've been lost in the woods, and it touched on enough real world folklore to make it believable. Wouldn't say realistic or real, but make it believable. I also have an incredibly overactive imagination, um, which is only kept in check by an incredibly rational mind. Um, so, if not for my ability to think through things, I would probably be much worse off than I am. I mentioned it before. I'm not only am I ADHD, as an old fuck. Um, I also have like a very uh, moderate to low case of anxiety, and yeah, we also I think you have to be the right audience. I'm just like any other piece of art. You have to be the audience for it. Um, you um, have to be the person it's made for. It is not a movie that was written, and I'm not trying to characterize what movies you're into, or whatever like that. But just for example, Blair Witch is going to bounce completely off of people whose main enjoyment of horror is slasher films. It's not going to engage the crowd whose big thing is torture porn. It's not going to be for those guys. It's not going to be for people who like um, steady build lore pieces like The Exorcist or The Omen or anything like that. Um, it is definitely, and it was at the time, a relatively new experience. It's not the first found footage film. That's Cannibal Holocaust, um, but um, it is the first one to really hit mass appeal and connect to so many people. Um, well, I wouldn't say it got mainstream popularity very quick. Uh, so I do agree that found footage can be iffy. Um, Initially, before it became a big thing, it was easier to write it off, write off some of the idiosyncrasies of it. The problem with found footage is finding a reason for there to always be a camera on the action. One of the biggest jokes, for example, in found footage is, why are you still filming? There's so frequently in found footage films, the camera is still managing to maintain its point of view, even though somebody should be the people in the scene are so terrified that they shouldn't even be holding the camera, or at least not holding it up. Um, and so over time, that 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 trend does tend to wear thin, and of course, that's when you start seeing later versions of found footage finding other reasons to do it. Um, the Paranormal Witness ones, or Paranormal Activity, that was the first one to really sort of revive found footage after a while. Um, and they found a unique way of doing it. They created a situation in which the characters in the story put surveillance in their home. So there's a reason for there to be cameras everywhere. And then the only shots you ever see are from the point of view of stationary surveillance cameras, which is a way to do it as well. Sometimes it gets really contrived. There was a movie I watched, and I can't remember the name of it, but in the prologue of the story, the main character loses an eye. And as we're in the early scenes of the main body of the movie, we see him taking apart cell phone camera bits and uh, and Bluetooth things and stuff, and building into an artificial eye a camera, which he then puts into his empty socket. It's pretty contrived. It's also really creative, and it actually addresses that fundamental problem of why is the camera always on. Um, no worries, man. I know you're a dad, and I know you've got kids in house, so that makes sense. My kids are 2,000 miles away. Um, so we've also never really done much for Father's Day at my house. Not out of any lack of love for me, but my household's really been lightweight on always been lightweight on holidays, in that we just never, our philosophy is like every day we should celebrate one another. So those special days are just a little bit more special, rather than like the whole day it's flatline and then Christmas. But anyways, yeah, found footage. I enjoy found footage. It's one of the things I look for, because I do part of the thing I like when I'm watching it is found footage frames things in a way that for me are often a little bit more terrifying than actual structured film. Um, one of the best things I think found footage films do, and it seems kind of cheesy because it's been ruined by all the ghost hunter, Bigfoot hunter type things, is in a found footage, somebody will often perceive something off camera. We as the audience don't usually see it or even hear it a lot of cases, but the characters are reacting to it. And I don't know if you've been out at night in the wilderness. It's one thing to hear something yourself. It's another thing for somebody who's with you to say that they saw something or hear something and you didn't pick up on it. There's something a little bit more frightening about knowing that there was something there, but you didn't pick up on it yourself, so you were kind of oblivious. Um, yeah. Uh, but yeah, so anyways, yeah, so creepypastas, horror movies, um, and that was kind of leading into what I was originally going to talk about today, but I didn't have my notes together. I had posted a while back on the Discord an an essay that I wrote um, about how having a horror game. Um, Thanks, Chris. You have a good day, man. Um, Basing a horror game on teenagers or kids um, is probably one of the easiest ways to run a game with a revolving and fluid base of players. Um, um, One of the hardest parts in tabletop games is when players don't show up or when you can't get a steady group of players. And that often requires a lot of contrivance or just blatant ignoring the missing player. When you're dealing with kids, especially in a modern and slightly retro setting, I think one of the reasons nostalgia plays a lot into it, but I think also storytelling wise, placing stories in the 90s and 80s offers some dramatic elements that would not be available if you're setting a story based around kids in, say, the 2000s and later. And so in that article, I talked about how, like, having your cast of characters be kids in a town um, allows you to, A, replace lost, missing characters really easy. Every town has a school full of kids, which then feeds into the next thing. It's really easy to bring in those new characters because they can meet somebody on the playground, at lunch, uh, swim lessons, scouts. New kid moves into the neighborhood. There's all sorts of ways to introduce a new character, a new kid, and it doesn't have to be heavy because kids often have this really low barrier to entry when it comes to socializing. As adults, we often hold people off at a bit of a distance until we get to know them a little bit better. But for kids, depending on the age, I mean, it could be as simple as, hey, I see you like cars. Can I play with you too? And next thing you know, you're friends. Or hey, you want to go check out that spooky house? Okay, you know. Um, the other thing that makes kids easy to run as a campaign for a fluid player base is all the other things that kids do, especially again much easier in the past, slightly in the past than it is today. So like 80s or 90s is kind of sweet spot. 90s if you want some internet, 80s if you don't want any internet, 90s if you want some cell phone, 80s if you don't want any cell phones. The um, the things that kids do and were forced to do just in their day to day as well. So if a player is gone for a session, That's okay. You don't need much of an explanation. Billy was sick. Kids get sick and they recover quickly. So Billy was sick for one session. Billy is back the next session. Mom wouldn't let Billy out that night. I was grounded. I had to stay home because my parents left, and I was left with my big sister who was babysitting me. Um, I'm gonna that this weekend. I'm at my dad's. Sorry, I can't go on the adventure. Because divorce was a thing. It was so prevalent back then. Um, which then also opens up all of the angles for play in places other than the town. This feeds into the article I just wrote about called Spooky Town. Basically, if you're going to run one of these campaigns, you need a spooky town. You need a town that has a reason for things to happen. Hey, Cal, happy Father's Day to you. You need a spooky town where things happen. Whether that's, they can be one thing, it can be a combination of things, but basically have a baseline conceit that your town is, for Stephen King, it is Derry, right? Um, Stranger Things, they have this common thread, but things keep happening in their town. Buffy is another example. Goosebumps would be an example of spooky town, even though the stories take place in different places. I feel like you could easily place the Goosebumps stories all in one town. But sometimes you need a release valve on that to keep it from feeling overly contrived. So you need to. It's always easy to bring things into town. Spooky Town does not have to be the source of all the spookiness. Things can come to Spooky Town. You can, a werewolf can come to town. The new kid who moves in down the block could be from a family of vampires. The old lady, or not necessarily the old lady, but like the angry, grumpy lady who moved into the house on the edge of town. She's a witch. Men in Black are in town. Whatever. Take a second here. Yeah, the victim game was interesting. It was really cool that Beyond the Supernatural offered that as an option. And I remember playing several of those because it was a fun way to play rather than play the skilled or talented people. And I also seem to recall that those rules allowed still to have relatively normal people have some minor abilities, like, oh, you're psychically sensitive. Let's see. If I don't hear on, they have a conversation about the. But yeah, yeah, the idea for Spooky Town, and this is where I was getting with it. So, like, it's easy for things to come to Spooky Town, but by playing in that like 80s or 90s type of a setting, you also have lots of reasons still for the action to go outside of Spooky Town. This is a time when kids went on more field trips, for example. Um, Sporting events happened outside of town. Band events happened outside of town. Kids went to summer camps still. You went to your relatives on road trips. The aforementioned weekends, or maybe even longer periods of time with your dad or your mom because of a divorce. Spending summers in different places, summer vacations. These all allow for, especially with a fluid table, um, ways to play scenarios that break the monotony of Spooky Town and kind of keep Spooky Town from breaking. Because if too much stuff happens without a direct cause, without a specific cause, then Spooky Town breaks. And the thing about Spooky Town is, I think it works better if you have either an actual cause for the spookiness. See the Hellmouth for Buffy, where everything kind of tracks back to the Hellmouth. Or Spooky Town is a conglomeration of various things. Some might be related directly to the town, but others come up tangentially to the town. You know, a witch, a curse, an object, something. The action takes place in Spooky Town, but is not necessarily caused by Spooky Town. But if you're going, if you take into account all those things that happen outside of the town when you're a kid, um, then that's other outlets for adventure. And this also allows players, both the fluid player base that comes and goes, but even your more constant players who are there more frequently, they can switch over to a new character. Let's say you have a good story and you don't want to put it in Spooky Town, or it doesn't fit in Spooky Town, or you just want to tell a story somewhere else. Um, then you can talk to your players and say, I have an adventure that takes place in Yellowstone. And then you could kind of figure out how many of the characters you can, you know, you can shoehorn into that action, and then everybody can kind of keep a stable of characters too, because what you could end up doing is having banks of characters based on locations. Okay, this is the friend group that is across town in the neighborhood where you know Julia's dad lives, and when she goes to her dad's for the weekend, these are the characters we play. And you know, all right, these are the scouts. Not every boy character in the campaign is part of the same scout troop or is in scouts. So when we play a scouting adventure, everybody pulls out their scout characters. And it's a very fluid way of doing things. And honestly, if I was to run an open table kind of horror game that was constantly just popping and playing, that's how I would do it. The contrived character entrance becomes really easy too. Let's say a character gets taken out of action. Let's assume not even necessarily dead. Maybe they're wrapped up in the webs of the evil demon spider that lives in the sewers, and they're taken out of action. That player needs a new character. All right, so here's the rest of the players freaking out in the street outside the house after their friend got captured by the demon spider, trying to figure out, and they hear the buzzing clackety 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 coming down the street of a bike with the cards in the spokes, and they look over and oh no, it's one of the Wiggins boys. They're the bullies in town, and he skids up on his BMX, and he's like, what are you fuckers doing out here? And next thing you know, they're like, there's a monster in there. And then like, okay, great. Now now you have your new character entry. Or, they see a kid, walking around down the street who bumps into them. Maybe a kid they don't know so much, or they only recognize from school. Because the other thing that makes it really easy to bring the new characters in is when you're in school, hey, Nesorian, thanks, man. When you're in school, especially younger, while you don't know everybody, you recognize a lot of kids. And you often know tangential things about them, true or not. Oh, that's Jenny. I hear she lives in the trailer park at the edge of town. And her sister is kind of special. You might know that about those kids. But that also means that if you run into Jenny, she's not a total stranger. You'd be like, "Hey, Jenny, what are you doing out at night?" And you're like, "Oh, well," and then the player can make up some bit of lore on the spot. Mom and Dad are fighting, and so I wanted to get out of the house. And then, what are you guys doing? There's a monster in that house. Really, a monster? And it just your contrived character entrance is super easy. And while it is a kid-based game, it doesn't mean that you can't introduce adult characters. Sometimes they fit, and sometimes it might be fun just to change it up. I mean, it has to be the right adult because uniformly in those settings, the adults. This is one thing that Stranger Things kind of did differently. I think is that compared to a lot of those shows, Stranger Things makes the adults an active participant in the story, whereas usually it's the kids that are acting on their own. Um, I think it's funny when I was going back to what I was talking about with with my kid and talking about their days as a child and the creepypasta stuff. When they told me about their friend, their shitlord friend who had them convinced that creepypastas were real, um, or based on reality, which if you know some of the creepypastas is a really damaging thing for a kid because some of those creepypastas are again very well written, but they're not always monsters and ghosts. Sometimes they're very believable, if not realistic, human evils. Um, but one of the things I was talking about is like when I was talking to my kid, I'm like, I think we all have that friend, you know, for, and then it was an interesting opportunity for me to share some of my childhood experiences with my kid. Um, and it's just been a really fun conversation, honestly. They're living out in the country now. They live with their brother at the organic egg farm that he runs. And they made a comment like, I really understand a lot of your stories from when you were a kid. Um, you know, I hear noises in the woods at night and I can't identify it. And so it's been fun, sitting there. We spent like an hour trying to identify this one noise that they hear in the woods at night. And it turns out that's probably, some kind of a bird. But, but I guess going back to the kids thing, I feel that it is a really good way to run a game. I mean, look at, for example, Lost Boys. The protagonists in Lost Boys are younger kids. Um, the and the only glue that they need to get together to become vampire hunters is walking into the same comic book store and then having a little bit of an interaction. Your spooky town can have those. I mentioned the Wiggins boys. For all you know, the Wiggins boys, they're in the know in town. Maybe the Wiggins family is an old family in Spooky Town, and they know shit. Their dad has told them stories. Their grandpa has told them stories. And because they're that rough and tumble family that lives on the edge of town, the Wiggins boys have like an unlimited supply of M80s. And if push comes to shove, they can always steal their dad's revolver. Whatever, they can hotwire cars. They are, they are really the most capable characters, in your little clutch of kid protagonists. But yeah, the fluidity of character of children's lives and the fact that they don't often have a lot of choice in the matter is a great tool to use in your horror campaign. Again, I mentioned earlier that there was, using it as a way to easily excuse the absence of a player. He's sick, he's grounded, he's got piano lessons. Their weekend over at their dad's house, whatever the case might be. Grandma's in town. And the funny thing is, even when those excuses are used, even if it doesn't make so, if we go by the contrivances of the genre, sure, it may not make sense. The kid is sick, and even though kids do mend pretty quickly, so it could make perfect sense. But a kid could still sneak out eventually. Sorry, I couldn't. When he shows up next time, and the player's there, all he has to say is, sorry, man, my grandma showed up unexpectedly. I couldn't get out of the house. I had to spend some time with the family, you know, but tonight I was able to sneak out. Or, I was sick. My mom was babying me. Mom wouldn't let me go out, but I'm really fine. And then, that could be a thing you play up in the game. What happens when they're trying to hide from the slasher, and, the kid who is sick but doesn't think he's that sick sneezes? It just lends itself so well. You've got an ever changing group of characters. You've often got schools that are hubs. You've got libraries. You then also have if your town is big enough, you might have more than one school. Or it's yeah. I mean, even as a kid, like the prominently featured children were the big reasons. Well, it comes down to if they're used well. Uh, the kid characters have to be used right, and the type of story that would lend well to Spooky Town is those stories where the kids are the protagonists, where they are the characters in the story. Goonies, E.T., um, you know, uh, Cycle of the Werewolf / Silver Bullet. Those stories where Lost Boys, where the main characters are the kids, is where these stories shine. Stranger Things, obviously, for modern audiences, but um, you know, a kid character in a mostly adult cast does often great unless they're done really well. But what I'm talking about more here is a situation where the protagonists are are the kids, and that's, I think, where it really shines. And the funny thing is, if you have Spooky Town, which is predominantly played through the eyes of the point of view of these kid characters, um, the other thing too about kid characters is one of the key tenets, like core things that has to happen for a horror story, is isolation. Children are inherently isolated simply because they lack a lot of agency in the world they live in. You can see a werewolf on the edge of town, but nobody's going to believe you. Nobody who matters, nobody who actually has the capacity to maybe do anything about it is going to believe you. Unless it's, that gap-toothed guy who lives in the junkyard, or the crazy old guy who works at the old bookstore. There's always some adult character who believes in it. It might be the older sheriff's deputy who is, he's seen some things, but it's but once you have Spooky Town, you can still play adult characters in Spooky Town. You can just shift it up. You have a setting, so you can choose to play some adult characters in their time, from time to time, and not ruin it. I would say also, just because you have kids doesn't mean you have to downplay the horror. Look at It. It is a story told from the point of view of children. Um, Stand By Me, while not a horror story, is children. Cycle of the Werewolf / Silver Bullet is children, and you don't have to necessarily downplay it. I would not put Lost Boys in the same category, because Lost Boys, while being a great movie, does tend to bury a lot of its horror in camp and goofy jokes and a very pulpy approach to its vampire subject matter. But It, on the other hand, for example, that's full tilt horror. The kids that are just the protagonists. So, you know, I don't feel like you can, and you can always change that. You can dial that back up and down depending on your mood too. Um, Sometimes you're going to want to tell a darker story. You can. Sometimes you're going to want to. Sometimes you're just going to want to be a little bit more. You're going to be want to be a little bit more Lost Boys or ET than you are going to want to be it, right? Um, but yeah, I feel like the Spooky Town concept um, is a great way to go. Honestly, if I had to write an RPG, I would write an RPG and I would call it Spooky Town. But I probably couldn't because I'm pretty sure Spooky Town is trademarked. Although I know trademarks are specific to certain things, so you could still possibly use it. I know Spooky Town is the name for the line of Halloween village decorations that you see at like the dollar stores and Michaels and stuff like that. So, um, but yeah, Spooky Town would be the game I would rate if I had that in me. However, there are plenty of systems to use. I mean, you can use any generic system, obviously. There is the Beyond the Supernatural system through Palladium. There are systems written specifically towards that, like Dark Places and Demogorgons, which is an OSR horror themed game. Uh, oh yeah, I remember that. So this is my buddy Jim. Grew up with him. His dad was, I believe, like a reserve officer or something like that in the town we grew up in. And we noticed one night he's sitting there. I don't know if he's cleaning his gun or loading his gun or whatever. I can't remember. But we realized he was putting silver bullets into his revolver. He had this 357, I think it was, that he carried as a sidearm. And my memory of it is we asked him what was with the silver bullets, and his response was, "There's some weird shit out here at night." I don't know if he was knowing him, he was probably fucking with us, but and he just thought it was funny to carry silver bullets. Um, but yeah, I remember that one. I mean, Jim and I and my buddy Garth have had our own Spooky Town experiences. Um, Either that or Spooky Town is not a real town and you actually get pulled into Spooky Town vis-a-vis some sort of weird like Goosebumps thing where like, oh, isn't this cute little decoration at this old lady's house cool? Oh, don't touch it. I touched it and now I'm in Spooky Town. um, but so yeah, Dark Place Demogorgons is a system that I've seen. There is Kids on Bikes, though I can't recommend Kids on Bikes. Kids on Bikes is more of a storytelling type of game, less game and more story. Um, the I know there's a few of them. If you can find it, and I've mentioned it before, there's a game called Meddling Kids, which is designed as a teaching game get to teach kids role playing games. It is very much geared towards the Scooby Doo style of things, including the DM playing the mascot character um, of the group. So that would be an option. You could always just drop the mascot character. I know that um, Kids Own Bikes has an interesting way, for example, of dealing with um, if you want to have a character like Eleven from Stranger Things in there, or say like the some other teenager with abilities, or character with abilities. Like in the case of ET, it would be ET, right? Um, the special character is played by everybody, and everybody basically has a card that is an aspect of the kids or of the special character, and players get to play those cards during play to like so they nobody gets to play. You don't run into a situation where one person's got the character with the telekinesis and the fire powers and everybody else is just a kid on a bike. Everybody plays that character, so that's kind of cool. um, Uh, Tales from the Loop, the core system, yeah. But I know Tales from the Loop is a game that has a story built into it that is very specific. One of the reasons why I am inclined to lean towards Dark Places and Demogorgons is it's an OSR game and it uses pretty much the D&D backbone for it, um, which means that you can pull in any monster from D&D stats into it. Not that all monsters necessarily fit, so that's one plus. However, I think if I was to actually play it and play with kids, I would use Call of Cthulhu. Um, look it up, but basically there was a adventure that was written for Call of Cthulhu that used a simplified set of not simplified set of rules, but simplified character creation to create kid characters. And what they did is they had some broadly defined skills that rather than getting into specific things like psychology, it's which you can't really imagine kids having. Um, they would have things like grown-up stuff or skills that are like that. Playing with matches. That which was really basically the broad spectrum skill for the things that kids aren't supposed to do. Like being naughty. You know, um, and so that would be a good one because you then have the entire Call of Cthulhu product line to work with. Um, so that would be a way to do it. It's also skill based. So I do like a skill based system as opposed to a class based system. Um, but yeah, I mean, those are all systems that would work. I know, like, for example, Meddling Kids has uses a character archetype concept where it's just got a massive list of kid archetypes, whether they're teens or little kids, whatever. It's kid archetypes. The bully, the hacker, the goth, the whatever. And you just pick from there, and that gives you some definition to your character, but it's mostly your stats. And like I'm pretty sure that Dark Places and Demogorgons does a similar thing because I don't think it uses actual classes. It's more like sort of like I guess you could compare it to say like the later D20 modern systems and stuff that came out, where you had fewer classes. And in this case, in Dark Places and Demogorgons, I think you don't have any classes. You just have sort of an archetype you pick. I'm not sure. I've not delved into it deep. Hey, Cody. Good morning. So yeah, that's my ideas on Spooky Town and why I think it's a great way to run a horror game. You can have a lot of fun with it. You can make it as scary as you want to or not. Character replacement is easy. Changing up characters is easy. It's easy to explain why a character is not there. Change of venue comes really easy. It also addresses in a lot of ways some of those problems that people have when they're playing horror games and most RPGs in general. The whole why am I here? Why am I going there? Well, kids don't often have a choice. We're going camping this weekend. Okay, so the adventure takes place during camping. We're off at a scout retreat. Okay, cool. The band is going to play, in a competition, in whatever town over. The football team is in an away game. Um, there are reasons to do that, and often you don't have to. The contrivance doesn't have to be directly involving your characters. For example, there is a football game in another town. Well, if it's only a town's drive away, then it's very possible that other characters are going to go to see the game or get dragged along to see the game. But also, those things can be the reason why the characters are left alone. Because if we're talking about the 80s and the 90s, children were often left alone and to their own devices. Anybody who's most of the people watching this channel are going to understand that because they were there. Um, but so okay, you're not going a town away to the football game, but your older brother and your parents are, and you don't want to go to the game because whatever, you know, you and your D&D group is supposed to meet, and you can't go waste time watching a football game. You know, and that would be a plot line you could use for Spooky Town. Um, you can have things that affect the whole town. We see this in Goosebumps stories, you know, where there's an enchantment that happens to all the parents, or something comes to town. Could be a zombie thing. It could be werewolves. It could be anything. It could be ghosts. Um, so, but yeah, so I guess really it's just the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, and part of this comes from looking at it from a story writer, from an author's point of view too. It's like I can see why a lot of stories and movies are written this way, because it allows for a really easy entry. Um, they are so overused now, but they're also classic, and so I would say you would not be remiss uh, for including a zombie scenario in your spooky town, um, because I mean, first of all, not all zombies are contagious. That is not a thing that has been there for the entirety of zombies. So you don't have to necessarily have oh no, I'm bit, I'm gonna die. It could just be that they're dangerous. Um, they could also not be zombies. Maybe they all have a bug in their head. Maybe they are all just they act like zombies, but they're all under a spell, and therefore they're more possessed. So you can swap it up. I mean, Invasion of the Body Snatchers is essentially a zombie movie, because if they get you, you're going to become one of them. You know, uh, but excuse me. But yeah, so there's not much more to say about it. I think I kind of covered it, but yeah, Spooky Town is definitely a way to go. It is a way to have a really dynamic and easy to run setting for a horror game. Um, the characters can change up as much as they need to. It's easy to excuse the absence of a character. It's easy to bring in new characters. It's easy to change up the locations. Um, I feel like it's very similar in that regard to superhero campaigns. A superhero campaign has all of those same benefits. It's easy to bring in new characters. It's easy to replace characters. It's easy to explain why a character isn't there. But yeah, that's my take on Speaking Out. That's what I was going to talk about today. Except for that, I woke up way late and I was feeling like I might not be able to. Um, yeah, but Simulacrum Zombie, it's it's really, again, it's ways to change up an old trope, if you really think about it. Because Puppet Masters is essentially sort of a weird sort of, not zombie, but I guess in a way, but they're more thinking. Uh, yeah, I you know, um, kind of interesting because if you look at the history of zombie movies, before Romero, we didn't really have the flesh-eating ghoul. Um, and it's my understanding that Romero didn't even consider his zombies. He kind of he was prefer I think he referred to them more as ghouls because they did eat people. Prior to that, the zombies that had appeared had been more akin to sort of like the Haitian voodoo zombies, um, where they're always some product of mind control or bewitchment, or if they were dead, they were very much more the reanimated thrall sort. So yeah, um, but yeah, so uh, if I can ever find time, maybe I'll actually give it a go at running an ongoing Spooky Town game. Because horror is kind of my jam. I do like horror stories. Um, but yeah, let's see. I think I'm gonna run till about 11:30. So if anybody had any questions or comments, all good. I'm gonna throw in an invite if anybody wanted to come in and say anything. Uh, let's try to keep it on topic. Um, so yeah. Ah, yes. Men without heads. Um, but yeah, I think it could be fun. And Spooky Town doesn't have to always be horror too. Spooky Town, well, I mean, I guess horror doesn't necessarily have to be supernatural. It could be an ET scenario. It could be. You ever see the movie Watchers? About the killer baboon and the intelligent golden retriever. You could do something like that. You could, I mean, critters. You can do critters. Um, you could do gremlins. You could do that kind of stuff, um, and still have it fit. Um, what's kind of funny is you could also have it become sort of an in joke, like with the game, like why is this happening again? What's wrong with this town? Also, the other thing I totally forgot in Spooky Town, if a player gets tired of a character, it's so easy to change him up. He could either retire him, and we could all imagine that line from the end of the book. We didn't talk to Johnny much after that day. I don't know what happened, but we just kind of grew apart. Johnny and Johnny's backburnered. Or after that day, Johnny and his family moved away. I don't know if they were afraid that it might happen again or they just couldn't take it, but we never saw him again. Yeah. um, you could easily just like write out a character easily enough. Like, there's also that thing where you can literally have somebody just, my sister got turned into a vampire. I almost got turned into a vampire. My parents are freaking out. They don't know what's going on. We're leaving town. But it's fine because there's 800 other kids in all of the grade schools and all of the high schools, that it might be in your town, depending on how big your town is. I feel like spooky towns work better when they're smaller, in like where you have like one high school, one middle school, maybe a couple of grade schools, because grade schools tend to be more of them spread out further so that the little kids don't have to go so far. But then, as you go up in grades, they coalesce. Um, uh, but yeah, well, and again, Spooky Town can have a reason for being spooky, or it could just be that's that's the sort of the plot contrivance you're using. Um, this is also a thing. If you are building a spooky town, build your town with reasons to have things going on. And it doesn't have to be clearly defined, I would say your spooky town should have an attached backbone industry, because attached backbone industries with a vested interest in the in succeeding will often resort to desperate things or become the fronts and covers for things. So even if you don't have a government agency or government lab or anything nearby, um, maybe there's a factory. If the factory starts to fail, what are the owners of the factory? Later, Yog. Enjoy your dinner. Um, if the factory starts to fail, what are the owners of the factory going to do to keep it going? Maybe the factory already did fail, and that's part of why Spooky Town is kind of a miserable place, because it's kind of it's hurting. And what are desperate people going to do? Um, Usually, you have one hospital. It's not a big hospital. It's capable of doing its job, but it's not like a major hospital. Um, but yeah, think of the things that you want to have in your town that can add to the spooky. And they don't have to all be defined, and they don't have to be set up front. But you could, you should have, you should think of at least, a place for kids to get lore. You should think of maybe a few local legends, um, or at least establish with your players that anything that you bring up as a local legend, they should play off as having known, unless it's there's a certain, like any sort of RPG, you have to sort of concede certain things for it to be fun. Yeah. And Grimm, of course, had the underlying plot contrivance that everything was related to the Vesson. So, that was a thing. Um, Buffy has the Hellmouth, and the Hellmouth gets used as an explanation for a lot of different things in Buffy. But the other thing that happens is, because you have the Hellmouth there, you have other types of people there, witches, sorcerers, demons, and everything else. It attracts things. Um, so yeah. But I would say that is a good way to do something if you want to have a heavily themed campaign. Um, the problem with that can come from the Stranger Things aspect of things. For example, if your central inciting thing is too defined, it can become quickly very difficult to, as time goes by in the campaign, to keep shoehorning things into that. I think Buffy succeeded because it was never really clearly defined. In fact, it's not even until I think several seasons into the series that we even find out about the Hellmouth. And so I would say, if you're going to write spooky, if you're going to go with the Spooky Town concept, you're probably better off either just hand waving that this is just a town where weird stuff happens, or have some sort of undefined weirdness magnet. Whether that, there's a ley line, it's cursed ground. Was the Hellmouth established in episode 1 of Buffy's? I haven't watched Buffy in ages, so but so yeah, and it's been forever. I just remember that the Hellmouth being there was an excuse for things to happen, and wasn't always tied heavily into things. All right, yeah, been a long time. So, anyways, um, so, but I guess what I'm saying is that is you don't want your your weirdness magnet to be so omnipresent that that anything that happens has to tie into it. Um, yeah, it was a MacGuffin, and that's really what you want if you're going to have it. And the thing is, your town doesn't need to have it to be playable. I think the Goosebumps principle is a good way, or Are You Afraid of the Dark? Now, again, those stories don't necessarily all take place in the same place, but they easily could, and they're often undefined as to where they take place. So you could very much um, have individual things have their own connections. Um, I guess another version of this would be, as far as more recent media, would be the Sabrina series too. Um, yeah, that also was a an idea for one, because Sabrina managed to bring in. It starts at witches, and then it ends up bringing in a lot of other stuff. Um, yeah, and this is the thing. You can have a central contrivance that kind of causes things, and then you can work your way out from there. Um, I will compare, for example, Tales from the Loop and Stranger Things, um, because I feel actually to a great degree Stranger Things owes a little bit uh, to the existence of Tales from the Loop, is in terms of like kind of what's going on. Tales from the Loop, as far as I understand it, has a central concept, a central conceit to why things are happening, but it doesn't clearly define really what exactly is going on. It has a cause, but the cause creates a variety of things. Whereas Stranger Things really has it dialed into this dimension, and it keeps layering on new layers of progressively worse entities from this dimension, but they all tie back to that dimension. Yeah, I mean, it could be that the Pinkertons are hired not necessarily even to investigate. Maybe they're just hired as security. Why are there Pinkertons around a paper mill? you know, and they become the antagonists. Yes, so the kids have to look out for these Pinkertons who are detectives and are going to realize that these nosy kids might be getting into something. Let's see. Yeah, we won't even get into that. But the man, if you want to talk, if someday somebody will write a book talking about missteps by corporations, and I have a feeling there's going to be a chapter on Hasbro, but that's all I'll say about that. So yeah, I mean, yeah, the spooky town, it can go so many ways. I mean, I think if you were going to have, for example, if you're going to have the government be the reason for Spooky Town, or one of the reasons for Spooky Town, have it be more diverse, or less defined at will. At least you could define it over time, you know, but we know from the beginning of Stranger Things that Eleven's powers are related to this government project. Um, we find out later. Spoilers for anybody who hasn't actually, watched Stranger Things. We find out later on that there's more to that. We also know right away that the evil in the story is tied to that same aspect. Um, it's so you, from the get-go, we have a very defined cause and effect. And then the writers just keep coming up with it's funny because Stranger Things, of course, gets tied into D&D a lot, and especially considering it is undeniably part of the reason why D&D had a resurgence. It struck a nostalgia vein with a lot of older people, and then also kind of brought the brand back into the forefront of a lot of younger folks who were getting into it pop culturally. But it's kind of funny because the show, in a way, kind of mirrors the progression of D&D. You start out fighting goblins and into some tougher monsters, and then you start progressing up through nastier monsters. Now, in the show, the kids slap names on them, and that's fun. And the names are often not they're not analogous, or even their abilities, but whatever. But the show very much shows, kind of like parallels that D&D thing. As the kids grow in experience, the monsters they're fighting are progressively getting worse and worse. And I find that kind of an amusing additional aside to the whole D&D connection to Stranger Things. And of course, I think with a Spooky Town this type of setting, your characters are never going to be that capable, because they're kids. They're normal people. It's one of the appealing things about Call of Cthulhu, for example. Is Call of Cthulhu, no matter how good my character gets, he is almost always, at his best, he's only ever going to be able to truly challenge the absolute weakest things in the game. No matter how long my character survives, I may get tough enough to where I could take a single ghoul on in hand-to-hand combat. I may get tough enough to where I could punch a fishman and survive. But that's it. That's the best I can hope for. Hey, IQ, man, welcome. Your coffee cup says you will not have a nice day. Why, Cal? Is it empty? Go fill it. Fortunately for you folks who have empty coffee cups, as mine empties itself, we're at about the hour and a half mark. I've mentioned a few times I'm trying to shorten these streams a little bit because I find that without a guest or without an actual panel topic, I can only go for about an hour. I hope it's been useful. I hope people might actually think about what I said with the whole Spooky Town concept. If you think this is something that you would like to talk more about or do more about, throw it in the comments. Discuss on the Discord. But yeah, it's I think it's something that has some legs. It could be fun. Like I said, what I said at the top of that was it's really the ultimate kind of open table. It would be a good way to do almost like a West Marches style horror game, because kids come and go. Kids have reasons to be fluid in their life. Adults, not so much. Adults are tied down by schedules and responsibilities. And kids in the 80s and the 90s were pretty much free to do whatever they wanted. So yeah, that is Spooky Town. Again, to all of the fathers out there and to those who are doing a father's job, happy Father's Day. It's an unsung job. I know it feels sometimes like you don't get the same appreciation that others do, but you do matter. And I would say that it may not seem like it, but your kids notice. So by all means, have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I'm going to call it here. And let's talk some Spooky Town. Comments, or the Discord, both. I'm happy to see you there. Take care, folks.